You are listening to an MLGA Network podcast.
Welcome to Thank You for Your Servers, a show which looks at the tech news of today, but from a libertarian perspective. Now here are your hosts, Thaddeus and Gary.
Thank you for logging on to Thank You for Your Servers. This is episode 17?
17.
Wow, are we that far, Gary?
We're that far, yeah.
Holy cow. Oh, man. I thought we would have given up by now. That is the voice of Gary Guthrie, my brother from another mother. I am Thaddeus Preston, a.k.a. Nick Way. And this is our almost weekly rants about the tech topics from a liberty-ish perspective. This and other podcasts are brought to you by the MLGA network of podcasts. So let's get to it. First things first, this is going to be a Microsoft love fest for the first half of the show because this week was Microsoft Ignite. It is a conference that takes place, I guess this year it took place in Orlando, Florida. And we're going to basically use as our source material here a TechCrunch article that kind of highlighted seven. They highlighted 7 of the best highlights to come out of this conference. This is kind of, I don't know, would you call this an extension of the Build Conference? The Build Conference is more kind of maybe developer focused, though it seems like all tech conferences are developer focused, particularly when we kind of get into the roots of the meat of a lot of these, I guess, announcements. This one had some pretty meaty announcements that where the rubber meets the road here, like when people want to get work done, I think Microsoft is moving into the IBM territory of becoming the go-to office productivity enterprise play. And the adage that no one ever got fired for buying IBM, it's like no one's ever going to get fired for buying a Microsoft enterprise solution. So let's get into, I guess, some of the things that were announced. This thing called Azure Arc. So as described here, I think a lot of enterprises in this day and age have kind of hybrid deployments when it comes to their cloud infrastructure. Some are across multiple vendors. You may use Kubernetes on Google. You may use AWS for storage. You may use IBM or Oracle for something else. So what Arc allows you to do is it allows you to manage these resources from Azure. And it allows you to integrate a lot of the features of competitors in the space that Microsoft Azure is in. So that's AWS and Google Cloud. It'll work on Windows or Linux servers, as well as Kubernetes clusters, a concept I still quite don't understand yet. But that has something to do with microservices and Docker, but I digress. This is kind of a big deal in the sense that like now they want to be kind of the go-to player, right? I think the way enterprise management works now is you might want to just choose a technology that you will stick with that will allow you to do the things that once IT departments did. In this instance, they really want to be an operating system and or a stack above all these kind of hybrid cloud solutions. So if it just so happens, if you just like to use Kubernetes on Google to manage microservices, as well as using S3 for storage and backup, and maybe even using another provider for some other service that you think is worthy, you can piece all these together. What Microsoft wants to offer you is they want to offer you one tool to manage and orchestrate all of this. I think it's smart.
Yeah, and Microsoft's been doing they've been going down this path not just on the architecture, the development side, but also on the business side as well. Flow, I think, is one of the most underrated or ignored tools that can really empower business to, hook into all of these other services and all of these other subscriptions that they may be using. We use in our development environment, we use Jira for task management, and we use Spiceworks for ticketing. We use, there's a bunch of different services we use, and not only, you can easily with Flow create these integrated solutions on the logical side. You're talking all this on the development and architecture side, but I mean, Microsoft's no new player to this kind of paradigm. And I think I agree with you. I think it's smart, and I think it's, empowering businesses to basically choose their solution is
they don't want to lock them in.
A beautiful thing.
This is antithetical to what Microsoft used to be.
Well, and it's antithetical to what Apple does.
Yeah, this is true. All right. I don't understand why there's so many fanboys out there in the development environments that use MacBooks. Now, granted, maybe on the computer laptop, I guess we can't say PC side, but let's just say PC side of things. Yeah, they're better at things, but like when it comes to their other products, most notably iPads, iPods, iPhones, they're trying to lock you in, and and I think Microsoft, while still keeping its toe in the consumer space, and we'll kind of go over some of their latest hardware, and of course Xbox, wildly successful. They when it comes to one of their core competencies, which was, a software company that offers software for doing stuff and getting stuff done. So I guess kind of to piggyback off of your love of Flow, because I also think Flow is a pretty cool product. One of their other announcements was something called Power Virtual Agents. So this is kind of Microsoft's new kind of no-code, low-code tool to build chatbots. Now, chatbots have kind of fallen out of favor because there was a chatbot hype cycle, I guess, a couple of years ago, and come to find out, these chatbots really did suck. And in companies that did integrate chatbots into their messaging, I think what is it? I think Messenger tried this. Facebook Messenger tried this. It was more annoying than it was useful. And so, I think these kind of tools, they're going to leverage Azure's machine learning smarts. And they're going to create these kind of chatbots that are going to help you you can just kind of spin one of these, program one of these up, spin one of these up, and just deploy them. And this is going to be more toward the enterprise when it comes to really just, deploying these to do intelligent things on the enterprise. And that kind of also dovetails into this project, this Cortex. And Cortex was just going to be this other tool that's going to definitely leverage, if you are a consumer of Outlook, Teams, and Office apps, Cortex is going to be unleashed on your enterprise to basically surface information. So it's going to create knowledge networks within your company. You're going to utilize machine learning. It's going to allow you to analyze. It's going to analyze all the documents that you have on your infrastructure, basically in your various repositories, even third-party stuff. So I assume it'll integrate with other things other than Outlook or Teams or whatever. I could see this integrating with Slack if necessary. And basically, it's going to just kind of allow you to just kind of surface information. And so if you're actively working on a project and stuff like that, it's gonna surface all this this disparate information that's spread across your enterprise. So I for one run into this a lot in our enterprise, is because sometimes when you're trying to develop a new procedure, sometimes you're trying to develop you're trying to create a new control system and stuff like that. You need to look at previous documentation, and it's kind of hard across the enterprise to figure out who's done this before? Is there a program that did this before? We're migrating from a a Fortran program for the transforms and waveforms that we need to do to this more MATLAB LabVIEW based program. Where can I grab those artifacts, right? They're going to be Word documents. They're going to be spreadsheets. They're going to be, in a lot of instances, they're going to be, we use this kind of proprietary code for, I forgot the name of the tool because we've since retired it, but you used to be able to run these routines within this command line tool that allows you to like take a waveform, ingest that, ingest it in the form of an array, not to get too technical, people, and like do transforms on that, right? Like multiply it by 10 or multiply it or do a derivative of it or something like that. Those are all that information, all that kind of these artifacts are just spread across all enterprises. And sometimes you just need the ability to just be like, hey, I need to update this control system. Can you surface to me probably everything I need to know about it? From schematics, electrical drawings, AutoCAD stuff and whatever. I'm most excited about this. This is cool because it's just like,
that's going to be super helpful because I don't care how good a company is. And I've worked for teeny companies. I've worked for big, gigantic companies. And I don't care what size you are, how good you have your controls in place for documentation and artifacts and test results and all that. None of them have ever been able to pull it together in a way that you can easily access the repository and deal with it.
Yeah. So jumping on top of more enterprise tools, especially enterprise management tools. So Microsoft, I guess, is now combining its config manager and Intune services. I guess they allow enterprises to manage PCs, laptops, phones, tablets, and other types of devices. It'll now be this cloud-based management tool. So basically, in a world where kind of employees like to kind of bring their own devices, they use multiple devices, and they're which means they're constant vectors for attack on your infrastructure.
Yep.
The ability to kind of bring all that stuff in-house, manage it from a cloud-based management platform. I guess Intune was always a cloud-based management platform for phones, and I guess Config Manager was for PCs. I guess we're basically kind of combining that together to create, this endpoint manager. And IT departments, again, are going to rejoice. Users may balk, but this is good, right? I mean, there's a lot of, industrial espionage. There's a lot of information leaking. Right. There's a lot of viruses. There's a lot of ransomwares. There's a lot of vectors of attack.
What would be really helpful, one of the struggles that we have as a small company is, you just mentioned bring your own device. And, it would be great to free up the overhead of having to go to each device, if it's going to be accessing sensitive data or whatever, going through and managing it. Just say, hey, you know what? Subscribe to our security set, click a thing, say allow to apply to my device. Now you can access my stuff using your device, and I have the security to know that you're not going to be injecting something weird,
Yeah.
That would be very, very helpful.
Yeah.
And it would empower, us from a cost standpoint too. And from we have a lot of independent contractors in our sales department, and I don't know what device they're using, so I have to lock things down logically at the application layer, which involves coding changes, and it involves builds and, all this crazy stuff. It would be great to be able to manage that.
Yeah, no. And so, and even the Microsoft CEO was very excited about it and thought that it was one of the more important announcements to come out of the conference this year. Next thing that was a big deal according to TechCrunch here was Microsoft's Chromium-based version of Edge will be available at the beginning of the year. We're toward the end of 2019, so 2020. January 15th being that availability date. Basically, much more enhanced privacy features. It's Chromium based, which means the previous engine that was Internet Explorer did run on will, I guess for the foreseeable future, we're not going to get rid of Internet Explorer right away, but it definitely concedes in the world of browser engines. It just definitely concedes Chrome won, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
even if it's Chromium, which is the open source version of Chrome,
it's still the same engine.
It's still the same engine. I think isn't it WebKit? I thought it was just WebKit, and that they just and Chromium is based on WebKit. Safari is based on WebKit. I think Chromium. I think the only difference between Chromium and Chrome is Chrome branched off of WebKit and just basically added some googly features to the Chrome browser. But at the end of the day, Chrome won, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? This is going to be fantastic. Last week we talked about ADA and accessibility compliance. This is going to make that much more achievable because there's going to be standard behaviors amongst the browsers now instead of, doing all these crazy checks. I mean, I don't know if you did any web programming back in the Internet Explorer 6 days, but it was the biggest nightmare you could ever deal with. You had to have all these exceptions based on not only what browser you had, but what version of that browser you had to make sure that you inject, the correct CSS or the correct JavaScript or whatever it is. This is going, I'm so happy that Google won this.
Yeah, you're right. And then I mean, even for when it really does help when industry, without any sort of outside coercion from the government or from some bureaucratic body, can come to a consensus when it comes to a standard. I mean, the same thing, we're starting to see the same thing when it came to HTML5 video, right? It took a bit.
Right.
But we eventually got there. And I think this is just, proof positive that Microsoft is being a much more pragmatic company. And we should try to better play with others when it comes to these kind of edge technologies. But
sure, and we should be humble too. I mean, if something comes along and the market says we're going this way, whether you like it or not, accept it, embrace it, which is what Microsoft is doing.
And you can build proprietary hooks that add value that you can only get on Azure. You can build those proprietary hooks in at a higher level of the stack, right? And that's what Azure Arc is going to really be about, particularly when it came to managing your enterprise cloud infrastructure. Again, this is one of these things where it's funny. Me and you are old enough to remember when Microsoft was pretty much utterly villainized for everything they did, and everything. It's kind of like the thanks Obama of the 90s, right? Like your Firefox browser crashes. Thanks Microsoft, or you're typing an email and you kick the desktop and it crashes or whatever, stuff like that. Yeah, thanks Microsoft. It's kind of one of those. It's kind of like that. Now it's really like some of the kind of tangential technologies of Microsoft technologies I use, particularly at work. I'm like, thanks Microsoft. I mean, because it's been so helpful and they've been better at this. Now I don't like the Office 360 crap. That kind of bugs me. Sometimes I just want to be like, hey man, why don't we just buy everything and just deploy it out? I mean, we can get enterprise licenses and stuff. We run into a lot of that with a lot of our kind of virtual machines.
See, I'm the exact opposite on that. I love Office 365. It's allowed me with a really small IT department just to say, log in, install it, done. I don't have to deal with licensing. I don't have to, as long as my subscriptions are solid, I don't have to worry about any of that. So I love Microsoft Office 365.
Yeah, it's just funny. We get the heaviness of an install on a virtual machine, and it's very, very difficult on a virtual machine that is not connected to the internet, specifically because these virtual machines run critical software that talks to control systems. And
so you're in an air-gapped environment.
Yeah, and so like
makes it very
the
different.
authentication is different. Sometimes we need to go in and edit CSVs, and we can't because oh no, we haven't activated Microsoft 365 Excel, right? And it's like, oh no, I need to edit this file, and so we have this really weird workaround where we have to like call a number, and so it's dumb. But still, I mean, we're a real weird edge case. The rest of the world thinks this is fine, right? And so
yeah,
and it is, to be honest. Particularly when it's becoming much more apparent that like IT as a job, right, is going to be automated more. As it's funny, then the complexity of your network and your enterprise, everything is much more complex. Particularly when you're having to deal with microservices. That's the Kubernetes thing. When you're having to deal with all these edge devices, particularly as IoT becomes a bigger and bigger thing, it's become much more complicated. So the tools that an IT professional needs, anything that takes that burden off of the IT professional and uses machine learning and just a abstraction layer of the stack that allows you to manage all these things is going to be a big deal. The other announcements here: Cortana lives. It's now going to include a male voice. Good, I guess. I don't know. I prefer female. It never bothers me. I prefer female voices personally, but I mean, it is what it is. They're going to start kind of integrating more and more of Cortana, of course, its digital assistant, into its productivity tools. I think one of the things I'm pretty excited about is like, so there's Outlook for iOS. They're soon be for Android. I actually really need to download Outlook on my Android because I am getting a lot of stuff that comes into Outlook that isn't forwarding over to my Gmail account anymore. And so sometimes I really need, there's actually some time critical things, some things that actually come into the Outlook account, which used to be my old MSN account that I don't really use as much. But now Cortana will be able to read a summary of said things in your inbox, man. Flag emails, delete stuff, dictate answers. So, and they're going to build that into not only the iOS app, but the Android app. So your Cortana will be on Android. And so that will be, that's going to be pretty interesting. And yeah, it's going to become your digital assistant within Outlook, which includes things like calendars and, email messages in general. And so I might try that out because that actually seems pretty interesting.
It sounds kind of cool. I don't know. I every time, there's always talk of more injection of personal assistants and stuff. Maybe I'm just more old fashioned. I just don't. I'll use it for some basic stuff. Yeah. But on my laptop, I got my mouse, I can click, and it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm hit or miss with a lot of digital assistant stuff. Sometimes it just kind of gets in the way. Other times it's quicker just to type it in. So, and then but that's going to change over the next couple of years as they push more inference kind of machine learning stuff on more to the edge. So I mean, a lot of these newer phones that are newer than ours have like inference chips built into the overall die of whatever processor we use, particularly if your phone uses a Qualcomm chip. And so that's going to allow more and more. That's going to basically increase the responsiveness of these digital assistants because they can do inference on board. So they'll have to talk less back to the cloud. I wonder if the Cortana updates that they're now starting to integrate into their other products is going to make that more possible. But I mean, that's interesting stuff. I think again, they're pushing more of the Cortana stuff for the enterprise. They don't necessarily. I wouldn't say they've surrendered the consumer market, but I think that's not where their bread and butter is. And this is like I said, as Microsoft as a whole moves to a more enterprise focused company, I think that. It's a pretty cool announcement. And lastly, the thing, well, no, I guess not lastly, but I mean, last of the 7 things, was basically Microsoft's web-based version of Visual Studio. So I think we had talked about this when we discussed Build earlier in previous episodes. They announced that they would soon launch a web-based Visual Studio development environment, right?
Yep.
And so basically taking all they've learned from Visual Studio Code, which hands down the best free code editor in existence, full stop. So basically they're going to integrate this new Visual Studio Code web-based environment with GitHub, which is another Microsoft company. And I have been introduced over the last couple of weeks because we've needed to find a new code repository kind of working environment that isn't a proprietary version of that we ran in our own little cloud, our own little basically enterprise network. We lost the server that the old version was running on. We then had to install a new version of this. Apparently we were running a version that was almost a decade old. And so we lost a lot of functionality. One thing meaning we lost a lot of licenses and seats.
Right.
And so we discovered that at San Diego National Laboratories, we actually have a GitLab instance installed on the enterprise that they manage and run. And so we've been really playing around with Git over the last couple of weeks. And there's some quirkiness about it. You have to understand a lot of the terminology, as opposed to check. The old system that we had was more of a check out, check in, kind of like SharePoint. This is kind of like, commits and pushes, pulls and fetches, merges and stuff. And you really, branches. And so you got to kind of understand that terminology and kind of integrate it into our workflow. But Git,
right.
Once you understand what's going on, it's a phenomenal thing. There's a reason why Microsoft bought GitHub, which implements Git, and they will then now integrate this much, much, much closely with Visual Studio. I mean, if you already get Visual Studio already, right? If you work in an enterprise where you have this license for Visual Studio and stuff, you can already integrate with GitHub anyway. Or any GitLabs instance.
And it's almost silly not to. I mean, there's so much available and there's so much power behind it. I don't know of any real development shop that's not integrated with it.
Or even even if it's a development shop that sits behind, the government wall, right? Even internally, we use it, and it's powerful. And then the fact of the matter that I can then log into a website that gives me a Visual Studio Code-like editor, make a change, do a commit, push it, and as long as I have internet connectivity, I can make that change. And then there's other tools built into Git that allows you to deploy code, remotely and stuff. And I think even Visual Studio Code allows you to do that. If you can connect Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code to, in this instance, you'll probably connect it to Azure. More easily. And you could spin up a microservice. You could spin it down, make a change, push it, do a commit, a push, and then deploy it. This is the one thing that has kept Chromebooks from being the go-to device, or even some of these Surface tablets as being go-to devices for this type, or phones or tablets or anything becoming go-to devices for any code editing, is an inability to really run a full IDE on your system. This allows you to not necessarily have to run a full IDE on whatever you're using. I mean, this is going to be crazy. It's funny not to kind of go too much on a tangent, right? But it's kind of what we were discussing with WeWork, right? Just nothing is fixed. You can be or do whatever you want. And as long as there's a meet space and an internet connection, if you're a knowledge worker, it doesn't matter anymore now, right? And
well, the only careful thing that you got to keep in mind though is there is a lot of client overhead on some of these web-based front ends, right? So that it's not. I mean, most of the time it's very well managed and it's very well scaled, but sometimes the overhead is not trivial, right? And it's, you have to, there's a danger that, and we ran into it a while back. We purchased some crazy piece of software that promised, oh yeah, we'll run on, tablets, we'll run on computers, we'll run on your whatever. And it was bought without IT's influence or our knowledge. And we were basically brought in at the tail end saying, install this on all these computers. It's going to be great. All our salespeople are going to love it. Well, yeah, it required like screen resolutions that were insane. It required, and all of this stuff was, it was a client install, but at the same time, it was all web content driven, right? So I love the concept. I think there's, there's a caution to be had that, especially upper management who wants to implement these kinds of things, that they don't go into this thinking this is a end all solution. There is still there's still some specs that need to be kind of vetted out a lot of times. But I love the idea. I love that, number one, you don't have any licensing issues. Number two, you just basically log in and start doing your work,
Yeah.
And it's transient too. This computer crashes. Okay, big deal. Get another one with the same specs. Boom, log in, and I'm up and running.
Yeah, most of that is a function of the fact that the code's pushed offsite,
right.
And its the versioning it does is like nothing short of amazing. In your case, it really sounds like a really crappy designed thin client system.
Oh, it was horrible. I mean, it was an extreme example, and it's really not what I'm kind of purposely taking it to an extreme and not comparing apples to oranges.
But this is definitely cautious, right? I mean, there's going to be a lot of people who are like, well, okay, I'm still going to spin up my IDE to do what I need to do, because a lot of people have scripts and macros and all kinds of like tools of the trade that they like. And Visual Studio Code is not Visual Studio, right? It's actually a lot of developers I know who use Visual Studio. They like Visual Studio Code because it is lightweight and easier, right? Because Visual Studio Code is very verbose, very complicated, extremely hard to master. It takes you years to really get your environment the way you want it. So, the fact that they went with the Visual Studio Code editor as the front end for the web-based thing is much more function of the fact that, like, my brother-in-law, who is a Microsoft developer, like, that's where he works in, period. Only when he has to go into the office does he then log into Visual Studio and does what he needs to do.
Right.
This stuff, I guess I would agree with your caution to see how they implement Visual Studio Code, the editor, in the web-based thing. I wanted to log in this week and play around with it, but I was just too busy at work. And so I think I will take the time to go over there and install it and maybe kind of manage some of my other kind of Python environments that I have at work, and use, of course, my local GitLab instance, and see if they allow me to even do it on my enterprise. That's another thing, right? Like, if I'm within an enterprise that has its own kind of thing, they allow me to do Visual Studio Code. They allow me to pull down packages. It's just I have to enter in a proxy every time I enter that command to pull down, packages. But I'd be curious to play around with it on the enterprise side to see if it works very well. There's a live preview available now. So for those of you who are listeners and who are kind of in the web development or code development or software development world, give it a try and see what's up. On the bonus coverage side, because we have definitely beaten this topic to death, is one of the other announcements was Azure Quantum. So as most of you know, I'm a quantum computing enthusiast. I don't know much. I know enough about it to talk somewhat eloquently about it, but I am not necessarily, I'm not a physicist. I'm not really even a computer scientist. So, I mean, I'm just a poser, but
you're a nerd.
Yeah, but I'm generally just a nerd. So that announcement happened at Ignite this week. I'll read from the company copy on the website. Quantum Azure is a diverse set of quantum services ranging from pre-built solutions to software and quantum hardware, to providing developers and customers access to some of the most competitive quantum offerings on the market. And for developers, we've created the open source quantum development toolkit, which is basically Q Sharp, which has all the tools and resources you need to start learning and building quantum solutions today. Azure's partners with industry leaders and to assemble and curate the most flexible and diverse set of quantum solutions available today, including hardware, software. I think the initial companies that are in this, Honeywell, which I was unaware even had a quantum computer, that they're offering access to their superconducting qubit 49 qubit systems. I think they also have some 20 qubit systems. IonQ, which doesn't even have a system available yet, they're a hardware play. QCI makes a lot of the superconducting hardware that a lot of companies use, and 1QBit, which is basically more of a software play. Most of the systems that will be used via this Azure quantum service, which is basically a cloud layer that interfaces the quantum computer hardware with, good old-fashioned PCs on the other side of the cloud, will use mostly these noisy intermediate scale quantum computers, or NISQs. So, I mean, that one kind of got me sort of excited, but I think they're just kind of piggybacking off the fact that there's a lot of attention in the industry now that Google has kind of claimed quantum advantage. And then IBM then slapped back, and then there's slap fights going on that we discussed last week.
Yeah.
And so they just want to kind of jump. They just want to kind of jump on that. Hardware wise, I mean, they kind of said there's some new Surface tablets, the Pro X, the Pro 7, and then a laptop. Some of these don't use Intel. Some of them use AMD processors or ARM based processors, I guess, based on Qualcomm, I think. The reviews that I've been reading, just kind of, just glancing, right? Because I don't care about really a lot of hardware performance because, no offense, it doesn't matter what you buy. If you buy something today, it's still going to be by a factor of 2 more powerful than what you've probably bought in the previous years. It's going to at least get done what you need done. So, I mean, I'm definitely in the market for a new laptop. And I'm Windows for life. I'm never going to go back. And so the Surface laptop looks promising. A 15-inch one would be excellent. A Surface Pro, Surface 7, there's too many peripherals I'd need to buy, even though they are pretty powerful machines. But that's kind of rounds up all the kind of big announcements from Ignite. Just keep in mind, again, Microsoft was hated, and now they are beloved by the developer community. The tech press doesn't talk nearly as much crap about them as they do about Google or Facebook or Twitter. And the federal government has just awarded them a $10 billion 10-year contract for providing platform as a service and software as a service solutions to the Department of Defense. Eerie, but it's almost a 180. It's almost like we live in an alternate universe.
Oh, it's a total 180 compared to the 90s, right?
Yeah.
This is a complete 180.
Yeah, so congratulations for Microsoft for once again taking up the bulk of the podcast with our almost sycophantic praise of just how we're so proud. We're just proud of them. It's like I'm like a happy father. I'm just proud, right? Because they're better.
Do you have stock in Microsoft? I'm just curious.
I do, because actually, as a big tech company, I have a philosophy outside of my 401k. I typically invest in tech companies that pay dividends, and they're not going to be high-flying tech startups or high-flying recent tech entrants. They're typically like Cisco, Microsoft, companies that actually have been around a while and paid dividends. Microsoft is one of the companies that pays dividends.
There you go.
And they've been a all-star in my little offline portfolio I do outside of my retirement account. So take that with a grain of, take all my praise of Microsoft with a grain of salt.
Well, I do not have explicit Microsoft stock or any that I know of in my 401k. I'm sure there's some in there. So
yeah, there probably is, because they've been tearing it up over the last 5 years. So.
Oh yeah.
Okay, well, all right. Well, next story that we'll give a little short shrift here, but like we've talked about off and on. This is a 5G story, and that is T-Mobile's big old announcement a couple of days ago that they're going to go live with their 5G network on December 6th. They're mainly going to rely on their 600 megahertz spectrum. There will be some markets where they use their millimeter wave spectrum, but T-Mobile doesn't have nearly as much millimeter wave spectrum as some of the other carriers. This is on the heels of the least final FCC approval of their merger with Sprint. One would argue that once this is approved, because they're still having to fight with a couple of the more, anti-market states. I think New York hasn't approved it, and California hasn't approved it. I think there are lawsuits that their respective attorney generals have filed because of this merger. That said, they're still pushing forward with lighting up this at least the 600 megahertz spectrum side of their 5G networks. They say that they're going to cover nearly 200 million people, or as Gary said in the pre-show, they're going to irradiate 200 million people
Yeah.
with their 5G networks. And this is a bold claim coming from them, being that literally by the time they actually light up this new spectrum, there are only going to really be two phones that are capable of utilizing that 5G in that spectrum, and only one of those phones is widely available. I think it's the Note 10 Plus or something like that, and then one's a OnePlus 7 Plus, McLaren. But I'm going to go into a T-Mobile store here and find out if maybe I can get some sort of 5G hotspot thing.
Yeah.
You remember those?
Yeah.
Like, little pucks.
Yep.
And see if maybe I can get a hold of one of those. And so when they light up, maybe play around with it a little bit. And so yeah, I'm quite curious to see what this entails. Some of their other kind of announcements that they do, they're doing some, to sow enough goodwill so that they can finally push the last laggards that aren't really down with this merger. They maybe convince them that it's going to be good for them to merge with Sprint. They're introducing a Connecting Heroes initiative. It's a 10-year commitment for free 5G access to first responders at every public and non-profit, state and police, fire, or EMS agency across the country. They're also going to do this one thing where they're doing the 10 million, the project, I guess, Project 10 million, and they're going to commit $10 billion to build, what is it? What does that say? Commitment to build to eradicate the homework. What is the homework gap?
Huh?
Yeah, that just kind of touchy-feely dumb stuff. Basically, it just means they're going to give free service to 10 million households. And I assume by access, I mean either via the 5G network or the 4G network. I suspect it's the 4G network. Which, again, before anyone says, boo, boo, it's the slowest network. No, fools. 4G is still good. LTE Advanced, still good technology.
It's fast.
It's fast enough to close the homework gap.
Yeah.
I use air quotes with that. I don't even know. Yeah. I mean, this is crap you have to do, I guess, that shows your social bona fides that, like, our merger isn't going to crush the little guy. I can't stand when companies do this, because this is not really going to do anything. And also, I guess they're going to do another prepaid solution that's kind of going to be the lowest price plan they have. For $15 a month, you're going to get I think you're going to get 2 gigs of data, unlimited talk and text and stuff like that. So they're going to create these kind of lower cost plans for lower income consumers. But I mean, there's not much to say about that. It's just we have to wait and see until the 6th. We have to see if, when they light up this network and then people go around and test it out, how fast is it really going to be? It's not going to be gigabit speeds because of one, the frequency range they're in, and two, I guess there's just not the chipsets available yet. I mean, the phones aren't really out. And even if they are, like, their power envelopes are so terrible. I mean, I was able to download like the entire content of Netflix in like an afternoon, but like my phone exploded or it ran out of juice.
Right. So, well, there's that. It's like we talked about. We've talked about this in previous episodes and also in the pregame here. It's like these numbers they throw out there are, they know that the market listens to these numbers and these speeds, right? Which, as we know, the speed really isn't the relevant thing. It's the latency and that the technology kind of alleviates for us. But, how much do you need? At some point, well, I don't need,
I'm a greedy 5%er. I want it all, man.
I don't need 1,000 horsepower car to drive to the supermarket, but
yeah, this is true. This is why I mean, I like their 10 million initiative, but I think it's just going to utilize their 4G network, which still has a lot of legs. Let's not get it twisted, guys. The LTE Advantage, which is kind of the last iteration of the LTE, that hasn't been fully deployed yet.
Good point.
And we're already starting to like slap out like, these 5G networks. You can still get a hell of a lot of speed and low latency with LTE. It's not as low as 5G. And that's what makes 5G in any frequency spectrum like advantageous. It's very low latency. And you see that. That's something visible. But yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to this. I'm glad that this is happening. This is one of the things I talked about in one of the early episodes of Thank You for Your Servers, where I was on my lonesome. I want to see these things in the real world so we can start to see if they work, how to make them work better. And, it doesn't matter what the theoretical limits in the simulations say. Get these devices in environments. Even the guys and gals who feel that 5G will give us all cancer and murder us. Well, let's see. I'm sorry. Like that's how we move forward on figuring out if this stuff is even worth it. Even to the Luddites of the world that want nothing to do with it. Let's get it deployed so we can see the negative implications or the positive implications.
Sure.
History has proven in aggregate, this is a positive. And so, I'm going to, like I said, I might even stop by a T-Mobile store today and just be like, hey, you guys got some devices we can use that can utilize this 600 megahertz 5G stuff? And if so, like, all right, I'll buy it. I'll buy it on the spot and hook it up. And when we go live, I'll play with it. So, but good on T-Mobile. I hope this Sprint thing finally gets resolved and that we can finally, and the battle will be joined against these three players, Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile Sprint, to give us the network we deserve. Godspeed. All right. Maybe last topic, maybe second to last topic. I don't know if you care about Google buying Fitbit. I don't know. Are you a user of Fitbit? I have a Gear Fit. I'm in a
I've got the Gear as well, and I love it. My wife's got the Fitbit. She doesn't really use it. Sometimes she'll use it in the swimming pool to track laps or whatever. Right. But I wouldn't say that we're invested in the Fitbit ecosystem.
Well, if you're invested in the Google ecosystem, the acquisition of Fitbit will inevitably push it to integrate more with Android Wear. I don't even know. They've changed the names so many times of their smartwatch and or Wear OS. Oh, what is it? Okay. So it's Android Wear, now it's Wear OS. Okay, yeah, all right. Yeah, it's changed so many times. So Google bought them for $2.1 billion. I can tell you for a fact, at my company, Fitbits are handed out for pretty subsidized prices if you want one, but most people just have Apple Watches or Gear or Galaxy Watches. It was a time where it was very tough to co-sign the kind of handing out of Fitbits or the allowing of Apple Watches and Galaxy Watches, but new corporate protocols that basically say, hey, just turn off all the radios before you walk into these protected areas. Now everyone has these things.
Right.
And mainly they're fitness, mainly outside of these areas. They're just, the ability to send a text real quick. I use it to track fitness, schedule, get schedules, or the big thing I use the watch for is when I walk away. If I walk too far away from my phone, it buzzes me. Like, okay.
I use that too.
That's really the most useful thing.
You know what I find useful, and not to get on too much of the Gear praise, but I really still appreciate the Samsung Pay over Google Pay, Android Pay, or Apple Pay, because it uses that the technology that none of the others have, where
the ability to use a conventional terminal to simulate a magnetic swipe.
Yeah,
that's what makes and I mean the only reason why I don't use that is because I'm so integrated with Google Pay.
Okay.
And I can't get both to work on the phone. And so I've been so wanting to use Samsung Pay, and I may run it through its paces here this holiday season when I'm out and
about. Do it on your watch. Do it on your watch. Just don't do it on your phone.
Yeah, so I can do that. That's the thing. I've not really played around with it. So if I could do it just on my watch, that would be phenomenal.
I have gone to so many places, and I go to, I start doing my watch, and they're like, "Oh, we don't take that," and I'm like, "Well, let me try." Boop, and then of course it just works, and they go, "Whoa, what was that? I've never seen that before."
Yeah,
it's still amazing.
Yeah, so maybe I should do that. I don't know, but I mean, back to Fitbit, I guess. The Fitbit apparently was struggling, particularly when Apple and Samsung stepped into the arena. And so, I mean, this was sort of a desperation move.
Yeah.
It might be good for Google to get more of this Fitbit expertise. Fitbit was the original kind of fitness tracker wearable, and I people who in the early days kind of swore by it. Now everybody's either got a Galaxy or an Apple Watch, and so I wish them the best of luck, but Google's track record in the last 10 years of buying companies,
not great.
Not great. There'll be an article in the show notes about from ZDNet about Fitbit is doomed. Here's why everything Google buys turns to garbage.
Yeah, I think that may be a little premature, but
yeah, right. Because Nest wasn't bad. It took them a while, but now it's
coming around. I'm invested in the Nest ecosystem, and it's been awkward, but you can tell that they're investing the time, they're investing the effort into making it right eventually.
Yeah. Same thing with Waze, right? I mean, we had a discussion pre-show about Google Maps is starting to integrate some of the features of Waze, though Waze is still, I guess, in my experience, is still slightly superior when you really want to know. If you really want a lot of hard context of what's going on around you in near real time, as opposed to Google Maps.
Yeah.
And then I think they had also put on here like DeepMind. DeepMind is not necessarily a bad acquisition. It was always a moonshot. I think we had read some articles about it losing tons of money and stuff. But in the grand scheme of Alphabet profits, it's not a big hit. And it's actually the most cutting edge research in the world. But I mean, they do actually point out some other notables. They bought HTC's design division to bolster its Pixel phone. One would argue that was an actually good acquisition because Pixel phones are pretty damn good design wise.
They're excellent phones.
And then the granddaddy of them all is when they bought Motorola Mobility. I owned one of the I think it was the first Moto X after the acquisition. It was a good phone. But yeah, they lost a lot of money on that.
Yeah.
When they sold it to Lenovo later. But I think what Google does is it just kind of sucks out what it wants from these acquisitions. And then eventually they allow these acquisitions to either wither on the vine or they become like integrated. So I don't honestly think, if I were to guess, and if I were a betting man, I would say that this is good for Fitbit's remaining employees. I feel that will help. This Fitbit acquisition will help them make the Android Wear or Wear OS or whatever the hell they want to call it now, bolster it a little bit. And maybe we'll get a third player. Maybe we'll get some sort of Pixel Watch here in the future.
Yeah, I could see that.
Who knows? I could definitely see that, right? Something Google branded. I mean, Google's gotten a little better in the hardware space. They're still mainly a software services company, and they're damn good at that. And they're definitely pretty good at R&D as well, as is the case between DeepMind and Google Quantum and the other kind of moonshot projects that are underneath the Alphabet name, particularly Waymo and stuff like that. So they're good at that. But I mean, yeah, let's pour a little out for Fitbit because I mean, as a company, it's done. I mean, it's not for this world.
Yep.
And it was good. It started a craze. Then the big players came in and snuffed them out. But I don't hear social justice tech writers lamenting too much about this.
I'm waiting though. The pundits will come out and they'll, you're going to use it to steal more of your information and blah, blah, blah. You see that coming for sure.
These are the same guys that have iPhones.
I know
it's funny, and it's funny because I saw a commercial the other day where Apple was saying like we protect your privacy and stuff like that. Like, yeah, you do, sort of,
right.
And it's probably why Apple's services are terrible.
Did you read the 37-page disclosure before you accepted to, sign on to the system? And I'm betting you probably didn't, but whatever.
I'm gonna bet no. All right. I don't really. This last topic, we're kind of running up on the edge of this here. I don't really. It's basically this interview with the Cloudflare CEO Matthew Prince on the struggles of policing the web.
I'm triggered.
Yeah, that's the first thing I said. The first thing I said is just like, maybe you shouldn't be trying to.
Right.
So that's basically just another example of the fact that like web censorship is not just a government thing we need to worry about. But it's insidious in these companies that think they know better, and it's ideological. If you don't remember, Cloudflare actually was infamous in blocking Daily Stormer or removing denial service protections on the Daily Stormer. Other host providers literally erased them from the internet.
Wow.
And that these, for everyone who says that if you guys don't like the way or the policies of these tech companies, these host providers, if you don't like it, you can always go somewhere else or build your own. Well, you sometimes you can't. I will harken back to a Gab, which is the alt-right alternative to Twitter, which is not really.
No. It's like the Pepe of the.
Yeah. It's mild, but they were going, or they have, or were threatened with losing access. They were hosting their service on Azure. And Microsoft says, hey, there's some problematic content on here. We may eliminate our support contract.
Right.
I.e., we will... So first of all, the question is, how do they even know what content was on their Azure instances? Which means your information may not be as private as you think. Keep that in mind when you're deploying these hybrid clouds.
Good point.
Also, like, what does it matter? Right? If they're paying every month and you're just hosting their content in load balancing and stuff like that. I mean, to me, that was kind of the more insidious thing about this whole, when they were doing, particularly after Charlottesville, and they were just kind of stomping on these platforms that were built on other platforms that are absolutely ideological and or bending to pressure from outside groups. Oliver Darcy, I hate that guy. There's nothing more I want to do to violate the NAP than to see that guy on the street corner and take it to the streets. He's always snitching on these platforms about their problematic hosting of certain content. And to think that guy used to work for the Blaze. Glenn Beck should be ashamed of himself for ever hiring that guy. He's now on CNN being the resident snitch about anything problematic on these tech platforms. He was one very instrumental in getting Alex Jones removed from Twitter, and a host of other things. There are a lot of these guys in the press, and this is just kind of piggybacking off of, this interview with the CEO of Cloudflare. There are a lot of people in the press that put pressure on tech companies to remove what they feel is problematic content that is absolutely antithetical to free speech. And it's, again, insidious and ideological, and it's frightening.
But they're a private company. They can do what they want.
And my retort to that is always, yes, but I can still bitch about it and tell them that they're wrong. And not what they're doing is evil.
Yeah, and choose not to buy from them or whatever, I mean, it's hard sometimes, but yeah.
Yeah, we could do an entire episode on how terrible this precedent is. But I mean, we've talked about it before, from the Project Veritas leaks to the algorithmic unfairness, trying to implement algorithmic fairness. And we've seen the things that came from Project Veritas and even from other sources that have dumped this stuff out. And so we know where they ideologically stand.
Right.
And we know what the pressure that can be brought to bear on these tech companies mainly come from the ideological left. They completely ignore anything that comes from the ideological right. And they are much more willing to do the bidding of who they are ideologically simpatical with, right?
Right.
And so that's just the world we live in, right? Like Twitter, all right, we're going to ban political ads. What type of political ads? How's it going to be implemented? What do you mean? And, the pressure that's being brought to bear because Facebook won't ban political ads, even if the political ads are false. It's just like, yes, because that's free speech. And one man's conspiracy theory, as I have learned in my lifetime, a conspiracy theory now, i.e. CIA trafficking drugs into the African American community, which was a conspiracy theory in its naked hyperbolic form. Well, come to find out, it was only 50% true, but the other 50% was still pretty insidious. And that the social networks and media of that time said, CIA denies it. So yeah, we believe the CIA. Right.
The CIA would never
so
lie to us.
Get out, right? Oh no, the CIA has never lied. I mean, absolutely, they're patriots, right? Yeah, but don't get me started.
Yeah, I won't.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we need to, we're coming to the end of the show, so we need to pour a little out for the Cryptocurrency Minute. This will be the last Cryptocurrency Minute. We are retiring the segment. The Cryptocurrency Minute was actually supposed to be more along the lines of news in the cryptocurrency arena, and it may morph into that in the future, but actually giving real-time prices, kind of weird, right? Because it's these podcasts and these prices are fairly ephemeral in nature. They pass. So, when you guys are listening to this, the price could have fluctuated by tens of percentages. And so we were just like, we talked with our producer, Ryan. He's just like, yeah, I think we can let that go. I think we can let it go now. So with no further ado, the last Cryptocurrency Minute brought to you by Coinbase. Boo, hiss. All right. Starting with Litecoin.
At least we don't have to hear about that thing anymore.
God forbid. I mean, don't you Binance, bro? Yeah. So yeah, Litecoin LTC is at $60.95, up 1.63%. Bitcoin Cash BCH is at $281.30. That is up 1.58%. Ripple or XRP is at 28 cents. It is up 1.38%. Ethereum, a cryptocurrency I own, full disclosure here, that's ETH, and that is at $184.37, up 0.15. And the granddaddy of them all, Bitcoin BTC is its symbol, and it is at 87.7351, down 0.45%, or almost 0.5%. So that is the final Cryptocurrency Minute, brought to you by Coinbase. All right, parting thoughts, man. Now that we've had a jam-packed show.
I think we've knocked this one down pretty good.
Yeah, we did pretty well. So anyway, that has been it, ladies and gents. Thank you for logging on to Thank You for Your Servers. I am at Nick Way, and Gary.
I am at Liberty and Brews.
Sweet. And keep following the Make Liberty Great Again podcast network on Twitter. We are working on some Instagram stuff in the future, because all the kids are on the Instagram. But, no promises. But with that said, we're out.